Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive into one of the most intriguing theological enigmas. Why didn't Jesus know the time of his return? Let's explore this together. The question itself emerges from the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus says, "But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." This statement has puzzled theologians and believers alike for centuries. Why would Jesus, who is professed as God in Christian belief, not know the time of his own return? Firstly, it's important to understand the nature of Jesus as both fully divine and fully human. In his human nature, Jesus experienced limitations. He grew tired, he felt hunger, and similarly, his knowledge was limited to what was necessary for his mission on earth. This concept is often referred to as the kenosis, which means the self-emptying of one's own will and becoming entirely receptive to God's divine will. In Philippians 2:7, Paul speaks about Jesus making himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. This self-emptying is a profound humility, where Jesus voluntarily restricts his divine attributes to fully embrace the human experience and to perfectly fulfill his role as the Messiah. So when we think about Jesus not knowing the time of his return, it aligns with this theological framework.
You and I are familiar with a wedding approach or formula or ritual that's quite distant from the ancient Jewish wedding after which the Bible is patterned. It opens with the ketubah, the betrothal, the commitment. Generally on the part of the prospective bridegroom, he took the initiative, and they established a marriage covenant. And the negotiating price, the moher, was he had to pay to purchase for his bride, and once that was done, from that point on, she was set aside. She was sanctified in a sense, set apart. From that moment on, she was considered exclusively for the bridegroom. It was an enforceable contract. Remember Joseph and Mary; they were espoused, and yet he had that problem because even though it was just an espousal, he was committed. It was a committed situation in Matthew 1 and also in Malachi 2 and so forth. So, and as a symbol of that relationship, they would both drink wine as a sealing of that. So that led to the next step, and this is you'll find this all through the Scripture in Judges 14, 10, and 11, all the way through. But let's go on to the next part. After that happens, the bridegroom would depart to his father's house, and he would prepare typically a room addition that would take some time for him to construct and arrange for. Meanwhile, sheep would prepare for his imminent return. This is a very interesting concept that we need to embrace and understand because it's referred to all through the Scripture. And that is that the bridegroom, they're committed, but they're not married yet. And the bridegroom is absent. And how long he'll be gone is deliberately indeterminate. She does not know when he's going to return. That's what we mean by imminence. There was no preconditioned event that would have to take place before he could return. And when he finally did return, there was a surprise gathering, usually at night, often at midnight. And he would sometimes be gone, say maybe for a year, while he added a room to his father's house. And that would give her, of course, a chance to get her trousseau together and get prepared for married life. And so he would, at the end of this separation, he would come to take his bride with him. The groom, the best man, other male attendants would leave the father's house, conduct a torchlight procession typically to the home of the bride. And although the bride was expecting her groom to come, she didn't know when. And so as a result, the groom's arrival was typically preceded by a shout, and which forewarned the bride to be prepared for his coming. In the notes that accompany this, we'll have all the footnotes and the authorities for all these things. But that then leads to the chuppah. I might mention, by the way, in the surprise gathering, that is even memorialized in Matthew 25 by Jesus when he talks about the famous 10 virgins. Understand that parable, the context of it. They're waiting for the surprise of the bridegroom coming. You find that all through the Scriptures, if you know where to look, Psalm 45 and so on. But anyway, the chuppah, then that leads to the wedding proper, and they would be escorted by the members of the wedding party to the bridal chamber, originally a chuppah, now just memorialized with a little canopy, but in the original days it was a separate chamber. And prior to entering the chamber, the bride remained veiled so that no one could see her face. While the groomsmen and the bridesmaid waited outside, the bride and groom entered the bridal chamber alone. There, in the privacy of that place, they entered into physical union for the first time that consummated the marriage, and that was covenant, presumably maybe a year earlier. And after it was consummated, the groom would come out of the bridal chamber, announce that the consummation of the marriage to the members of the wedding party, and then the guests and so forth. The wedding party would announce it to the guests and so forth. And that leads, of course, to the marriage supper. Lasted typically 7 days. You'll find that in a number of places, Judges 14, Matthew 9, Matthew 22. Again, we have it used as an idiom in the parables and so forth. So they had a great wedding feast. So and after the 7 days, the bride would be unveiled and everyone could see her face and so forth. So that's it. Now, what's interesting, this marriage model is not only in the scriptures and in other authorities, it's fulfilled in the idiom of the church in the scripture. The covenant was established. 1 Corinthians 11:25 deals with that. The purchase price was nothing other than the blood of Christ himself. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 goes through that. In fact, that's what we usually do when we take communion, is to commemorate that. The bride then was set apart. You want to really read carefully Ephesians 5:25-27, where we have instructions where Paul tells the wives to submit to your husbands and so forth. And he goes through that whole thing, and then even quotes Genesis 2:24, for this cause shall a man leave his mother and his father and cleave to his wife, the two shall be one flesh. He quotes that in the context of the bride of Christ and Christ himself, Christ in the church. The very next verse after he quotes that, he says, but just about the time you get there, you think what Paul is talking about is the marriage relationship. But then he throws you a curveball. He says, I speak of Christ in the church. He's expressing this model. And we're reminded of the first covenant in 1 Corinthians 11. The bridegroom presently has left for the Father's house. That's where he's been for this interval period of time. And there will be an escort to accompany him upon his return to gather his bride. And we'll see that in 1 Thessalonians 4 shortly.
Till next time, stay blessed and keep the faith.